How to build a Blackgates Sweet Pea 5-inch gauge locomotive, part 57. The time has arrived to refit the driving wheels. This proved to be a difficult job and some modifications to the axle boxes were required first. Here's the story so far. The cylinders, complete with the blast pipe and the crosshead guides, are all in place, as are the two foot plates at the rear of the engine. If you've been following the series, you will see that there are some subtle modifications. For instance, the blast pipes are held in place using O-rings, not threaded into the cylinders as shown on the drawing. This allows me to fold down the blast pipe to keep it out of the way, because what I need to do now is turn the chassis over to work on the underside. I'm putting all the parts in boxes so I know where they are when I come to refit them. My brain seems to work in the same way. I put things in little boxes in my head, then I forget where they are. But thankfully, not so in this case. I put plenty of oil in the steam chests to make sure they didn't go rusty, and here I'm wiping it away. The cylinder faces do actually look quite good, but they are far from perfect. I had to use some JB Weld high temperature epoxy putty to fill some holes in the port faces. I will find out in due course how successful this is. I need to make the complex linkage to operate the drain cocks, but I won't be doing that in this episode. This will be an interesting job, and I've already figured it out in my head as to how I'm going to do it. And one more time I'm going to depart from the method shown on the drawing. The pronunciation of the word drawing, D-R-A-W-I-N-G, has always puzzled me. A lot of people say drawing, with two R's in the middle, or maybe one R. How did that come about? Since when do you pronounce the letter W as an R? I'm still confused all these years on. But anyway, it's not important. On with the job. Here are the wheels with the axle boxes fitted. I'd like to say something about axle boxes. I don't normally make them like this. And now it's a very labour-saving top tip time. As you can see here, the axle boxes have flanges at each side, and they're nicely curved as they're supposed to be. But why do miniature locomotives have flanges at both sides of the axle boxes? This has always puzzled me, and a very well-respected model engineer told me many years ago just to machine one flange and not two, because a single-flanged axle box can't go anywhere, the wheel is in the way. Time is money, and axle box making suddenly becomes a quicker job. The single flange still needs radiusing so that the engine can rock from side to side, and do other simple things like go round corners. I'm not going to change the flanges on these axle boxes because they're okay. What I am going to do is fix the eccentric on the axle to stop it moving about. This eccentric is superfluous to the job. It was originally made to drive an axle pump that is not fitted. I've currently run out of 4BA Allen head grub screws, which I would normally use for jobs like this. So instead I'm going to show another top tip time. All I did was turn down the head of the bolt so that it cleared the eccentric and then screw it in place. I don't really like slot-headed grub screws, but this doesn't require any pressure. It's only to hold the eccentric in position and stop it rattling about. There's a hole in the axle, and this fits into the hole, and once it's tightened, it's a very solid job. I doubt if it will work loose. It will just stay there, holding the eccentric in position. I've changed the camera angle for this shot because I want to show how small the holes are in the top of the axle boxes, which are really the main oil holes for the axles. In fact, on the front wheel set, there aren't any holes at all. Here's the suspension arrangement. It's coil springs all round, and this part of the engine has been made as per the drawing. The trouble is the fittings that support the springs are a very loose fit in the holes, and when I turn the axle boxes over, which I will have to do as I fit them to the chassis, they fall out. I'm more concerned about the tiny oil holes on top of the axle boxes. These are no good at all. The idea of these is to allow lubricating oil that you squirt through the holes in the wheel onto the top of the axle box to run down and lubricate the contact points between the axles and the axle boxes. I'm going to modify this arrangement. First of all, I move the axle boxes inboard away from the bearing surface on the axle, and here I'm drilling a 1/8 of an inch diameter hole all the way through until it comes into contact with the axle. Yes, it will mark the axle slightly, but it's unimportant because it's not part of the bearing surface. Then I set the depth stop on the drilling machine and drill 2/4 inch diameter holes. Part of the way down the hole I've already drilled. This acts as an oil reservoir. Miniature steam engines like the full-size use a total loss oil system, so you do have to lubricate them frequently. In order to hold the fittings into the axle boxes so I can turn them upside down, I just coat them in thick grease. This is special low friction grease, but it can be any kind of grease at all, the thicker the better. When I coat the end of the parts in grease and push them into the holes in the axle boxes, I can safely turn them upside down and they do not fall out. Well, not much anyway. Fitting the axle boxes into the horn blocks was difficult enough. Getting the ends of the fittings that hold the coil springs was even more difficult. I had to use a screwdriver to persuade the end of the fittings to go through the holes in the pieces of angle fastened to the chassis. Originally, the horn keeps were fitted with these long bolts and lock nuts to hold the axle boxes higher up in the slots. For the moment, I'm not going to fit them because I don't think they're going to be required. The early Sweet Pea design used rubber blocks for the suspension for the rear wheel because the valve timing is very dependent on the rear wheel being in the right place. I'll look at this issue later on. When I dismantled the wheel sets, I marked every part using a felt tip pen. I know where they go when I put them back together. This is one of the horn keeps and it has the letters R written on it, which surprisingly enough does not stand for Rolls-Royce or rock and roll, it stands for rear right. And providing that the lettering on the horn keeps can be read from the inside of the chassis underneath, that's an indication of where the part was originally fitted. Fitting the horn keeps was a very simple job. And here on the bench are the 8 4BA bolts to fit them back together. The suspension feels good, it's quite firm. Any further adjustment to the suspension needs to be done once the engine is complete and the boiler is fitted and filled with water. That's it for this episode. I hope you've learnt something. I generally do when I make these videos. Stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.